Okay, we're live. Welcome back to the Hill of Roses, where we come once again to celebrate the best contributors to our independent policy movement for progress to bring power to people like you. With us on the program today, we're going to be talking with Liam O'Mara. He's a friend of the program. We've had him on several times as an individual interview, as well as when we had our 21st Century People-Powered Government. We're big fans of the campaign. He's running for Congress in California's 42nd District. And so what we're going to be talking with him today is, reacting to some of the current events that are going around the country and, getting to know Liam more better as just a person. Beyond the platform, we've talked a ton of policy with him. So we want to hear who he is more, as well as what his thoughts are on the ongoing situations in our nation right now. So everyone, stay tuned. We're going to get into that right now. Okay, we are live. Hey, Liam, how you doing today, man?
Howdy, good.
Yeah, it's great to see you, man. It's been a bit. I think it's been since, what, June the last time we touched base?
I think so, yeah. It's been more than a month, but I don't remember the exact date right now.
Yeah, so, I first wanted to just ask you, how have you been? Like, what has the campaign been up to? And I think it's now been roughly like 2 months since we've last touched base. I know there's been some big endorsements you've been getting along the way. What has the campaign been trying to do to push the needle so far in the past couple months?
Well, yeah, like I said, we picked up a few more endorsements, including Congressmen Ted Lieu and Mark Takano, and from Andrew Yang, all of which deeply appreciated, and a real sign that we're making serious progress here. And I really want to just toot the horn of my field team and data team, because they do a fantastic job at pulling together our call lists for our call time. We did something like about a month and a half ago, something like that. We did a statewide day of action through the California Democratic Party with 14 congressional campaigns. And we were 4 people short of second place in the state for the number of contacts made. So, I mean, I'm really a big fan of the people that we have phone banking for us and doing that work. We also have some interesting video work coming out. There's an ad we released for this month that I'm quite proud of. And my filmmaking team is hard at work on a few others. We've got 2 other campaign ads that are going to come out over the next couple of months of like these nice, well-produced ones. And then we have a series of, I can't really go into details, but they're going to be like shorts. They're going to be like 10 to 15 second little shorts that just like hit you with a really interesting policy point, but in a really odd way. And I'm
excited for
how those are going to work. Yeah, we're hoping to get to where we can release them across a week. So put out a new short constantly. So they're doing a ton of batch filming of these things right now, and the early work looks great, so I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I think it's super important when you're trying to educate voters on policy, which, let's be honest, most people out there don't really dig their teeth into the policy a lot of the times. It's very important that you present it in an entertaining way through these hopefully shorts, which I intend to see some entertaining quality. I know you're going to put out something great.
So yeah, there's going to be some humor in them. And I use memes in my lectures, and I'm a big believer in trying to.
You got to keep the audience's attention to actually put information in here. Yeah, it's a great method, and as a teacher, you know that all too well. But I wanted to now turn just away from the race to some of the national things that have been going on. I'd love to hear in your opinion. There's certainly been an outcry, especially around Portland, now in Wisconsin, in the subjects of criminal justice. There's been ongoing protests, some of which have turned to looting, some of which has turned to violence against the protesters. What's your general thought process of the ongoing situation in regards to the protests?
It's actually a fairly complicated situation, and I think far too much of the rhetoric on it is extremely reductive. You'll see people from the right, including my incumbent, doing nothing but talking about looting and burning and graffiti and how we need to iron fist. And then you have people that completely ignore that and talk only about the protests and the social justice issue. To be fair, the violence is an extremely small part of it and is massively overblown. And some of that has to do with the sensation-driven corporate media. They want to chase outrage because that's where the money is. So 1 square block of Portland, which is mostly graffitied, gets turned into an existential threat to America, the second Civil War. And they're like, what are you talking about? So, yeah, I mean, is it reprehensible that someone tries to throw fire into a building? I mean, yeah. I mean, these things, most of them are caught relatively quickly and put out, so they don't do a huge amount of damage. But like, if you look at the narrative on Fox News, it's like violence, 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 but it's all like graffiti, 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 attempted arson, graffiti, graffiti. Yeah. I think too much of that is massively overblown. But by the same token, we can't completely ignore it either. And there has been a tremendous amount, we have to admit, of force being used against the protesters, which is certainly fed back into it. And while I'm not sort of anti-policing by nature, I mean, complex societies tend to need something to enforce laws. It is worth noting that out of the million calls LAPD got last year, something like 10%, 11%, something like that, were actually for any kind of violent crime.
Yeah.
You know, most of the things that they get called out for are not huge issues, but we do need them for those issues where there are violent crimes. So I don't want to like disparage what they do for that, but I do think we need to broaden tons of other community support. So I'm definitely behind all the efforts to increase support for social workers and other types of first responders. And tons of police chiefs have gone on record saying we should not be in all these places where we are. And I kind of agree. I mean, we should have better trained people who know those specific issues in those areas. And I think it would help a lot with the kind of anger that we see towards police in this country.
I wholeheartedly agree. And as always, I appreciate you bringing nuance to the issues we discuss. I think that the problem is, 35% of individual calls are either theft, the property damage, or it's a violent crime. 65% of what, these cops are doing are things that can be delegated to other administrations, as you said. And there's precedent for this. We used to not have park rangers. Police used to be the people who administered that. But we decided, the parks are going to be administered by someone else who doesn't possess lethal force always. Same thing goes with traffic attendants. We used to have the police be the people who always issued the tickets. But then we said, they shouldn't be involved in that job. Let's move it to someone else. And so I think that's really the main action. And I think sometimes it gets confused by some of like the battle cries on this issue. Like when they make the full notion of defund the police, in its technical definition, that means strip all funding. And I still think that there is a need for police, but only for that 35%. I'd love to hear what your reaction has been to like how the protest has been led to try and get this reform. Do you think that there's any advice that activists need to be taking to heart, or do you think it's been largely effective? Like, what could be being done to make this even more effective?
Okay, so that's a tough one. First off, on the defund call, I don't use that language, and it hasn't stopped, of course, my opponent from saying that I'm for defunding the police, because that's what they do. I'm a radical socialist anarchist. I'm gonna burn the country down. Of course, whatever. Yeah,
the right assumes we're all a narco communists out here. I just don't get that. Very few of us are.
The issue, though, that they're really getting at is actually a fundamentally good one. And we do in the long run need to shift a lot of that funding away. I think one way that would make it a bit less prone to throw up the kind of psychological defense mechanisms, people digging their heels in and freaking out, like obviously the police unions are very unhappy about this, is to make sure that people understand we don't want to touch the funding currently for them and the current officers so that no one's going to get fired. You're not suddenly think, because any union, police unions are like any other union in that sense, they're going to think of their workers first. Tell them, you keep your job, that's fine. We're going to give some of the responsibility to other people. And then as people retire, if we don't need as many of them, go figure, we just don't hire more police, because you don't honestly need that many people with weapons patrolling the streets. honestly does not reduce crime. In many ways, it actually feeds it, because it can create a sense of almost an occupying force in a lot of neighborhoods. I would prefer in the long run we get closer to the old style community policing model, where people in the police departments come out of those communities and know the people in them already, instead of these much larger departments that recruit statewide or nationally and hire just anybody who's interested. So you get someone that really has no idea what the local issues are or who the people are. But those are long-term processes, and I would like to encourage us to move in those directions. But it needs to be done in a staged way, so that you're not immediately putting people on the defensive. And this, I think, is one lesson that I would urge. And I know that plenty of people on the left are going like, "Oh, this sounds too moderate. This sounds too moderate." The point here is, if you put people too much on the defensive, you don't get what you want. What you get is a backlash. What you get is people pushing back hard against you, and things get worse. It's a point that I try to make oftentimes in another extremely fraught issue in our country, the issue of gun rights and gun violence. Because of the language used, oftentimes it allows the right to exploit a sense of fear around the issue, which has let them. Democrats used to control most state houses in the country. We went from about 3/4 of state houses to about 1/3 of state houses. We've lost most state houses and most governorships, and the gun issue is a part of that, because it lets them play on these kind of fear tactics. So that's one thing that we could learn in terms of these protests. But on the flip side of that, and just quickly, I'll point out that doesn't mean we take any of the pressure off. I think we need more of it. I think people need to stay in the streets, and I hope and pray that people continue to do it, because sustained protest is how we get somewhere. The massive protests we saw in the 50s and 60s are what got us that civil rights legislation. It wasn't people sending polite letters to their congressmen or engaging in careful debate in their neighborhoods. It was sustained people power in the streets demanding change.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you in that you got to give people that opportunity to save face. It's a solution where it's I'm not going to be worse off if I'm a police officer because of these changes. In fact, it's going to be taking some responsibility away. It's making my line of work less stressful, phasing it out over time. I think that's extremely important. And to the point you made beforehand about the importance of community policing, I think that's vital. More than just knowing the people, you have to think about these. These are jobs. These are oftentimes high-paying jobs in terms of benefits for the higher-ranking officers. Oftentimes, it's a large budget. I know particularly in California, the salaries are particularly high. And you have to think about it. If they're not living in your community and they're getting this income, you're basically sending money outside the district to fund other community stuff, while these poor areas often get over-policed. And I think if you simply have that community policing, well, then those people are paying into the system. Now they're paying in taxes to make the school districts better, to potentially bring in more infrastructure development, to hopefully bring more jobs. I think it's super important that the people who are policing come from the area, not just grew up there, but are also still living there.
And there's a sense of respect that I think is really important here. And you see this on the right a lot. They want people to respect the police, and you've got all the whole back the blue, all that stuff there. And I see those thin blue line flags just everywhere. People want a sense of respect for them. Police has lost a lot of respect in this country precisely because of the heavy militarization of policing and because they're not connected to the community. If you back away from those two things, if we have more first responders of different types taking care of a lot of issues, so that police officers aren't having to take care of a mentally ill person or domestic abuse things where there's all kinds of potential for things to go wrong. You have the right kind of person there, that makes their job easier. And if they mess up less often, people have an easier time respecting them. If they come from the community, people have an easier time respecting them. If they're not walking down the streets with long guns, people will have an easier time respecting them. You look at most of the countries of the world, you have police officers that never draw their weapons in their entire careers, where it's extremely rare to have shootings. You'll get there are countries in Europe where one shooting a year is a crisis.
There
And
are
we
several
have,
countries in Europe that don't even allow their officers to carry guns.
right, and we have 1,000 to 1,500 every single year.
Yeah.
If we can get to where there's a greater amount of respect already, then you don't have the same kind of pushback. Then they don't use as much lethal force. It's a circular thing. There have to be changes on all sides here that make it possible. We can't just say respect without doing something to better earn that respect, like the police in Europe and Japan and Canada all do.
Mm. You know, I wanted to focus on one of those tangential industries you talked about of why this protest has become so divisive. You know, corporate media has, as you said beforehand, really been showing the more sensationalized portions of these protests, the violence, the graffiti. And I wanted to ask you, in your opinion, how do we try and alter that incentive model? Like, you know, it's great to point out the flaws and say, let's embrace independent media. Please do. We appreciate it. But like, how do you regulate those corporate giants that still have millions in viewership to do a more respectable news job of presenting a little bit more objectivity?
Yeah, on the one hand, I gotta make that Jello Biafra reference, the whole become the media, which you are doing, which is great. You know, people stepping up and doing that. It's fantastic. But let's be realistic. It's not going to get the millions of people to stop watching CNN and Fox and MSNBC. That stuff is still going to dominate. The way to get at it is, I mean, it's complicated in one way because the First Amendment technically does give us the potential for an extremely free media. The problem there is the lack of regulation, and the profit motive changes everything there. If we could get it to where news is understood as a public service again, and these large companies, because they're all part of massive conglomerates anyway, if we can get them to treat news as a loss leader, like the networks used to. I mean, the big networks used to put on news programs like at a loss, just to get you to tune in to their network to see their other things. That doesn't work as well with these giant cable news companies that are all news all the time with this news cycle that has to manufacture something.
I'm always confused by that 24
part of massive conglomerates that make money in tons of other areas. So if you tell them you make your profit here, you provide news. And we introduced some of the regulations. I mean, honestly, a huge amount of our problem came in when Reagan began deregulating news. If we can restore things like the fairness doctrine, I think that'll help a lot too.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you. It's always baffled me that, you know, the news cycle has become truly 24 hours. Not that there isn't the news out there, but when you think about the effort to produce something of quality, to be able to put that out for 24 hours, it seems like it's unfeasible. I remember my parents, they would often say they had the news at one time of the day and they would tune in for that. It wasn't constantly any hour of the day you could turn it on. And I think that's reducing the overall quality. And I would say this is a bipartisan issue too. Like, I 100% agree with you on the fairness doctrine, but the deregulation continued in the Clinton era too. You know, that was the real reason why we had a significant amount of consolidation, because beforehand they had a limit of, you can only own 7 basic like media networks, whether it's like radio, TV, etc. And now the average is around like 35 that they own. So it's certainly consolidated into more hands, which means you're getting even less information out there. And frankly, to the capitalist point, there's less competition in the marketplace for ideas to come out. And so I'd love to hear, like, is this a legislative fix that you think needs to come first? Because I think this is a bipartisan issue. Is it simply just electing more people? Like, do you think something around media regulation could get through the current state of Congress?
The current one, no, because they're taking money from these massive conglomerates.
Yeah.
I mean, when we went from like 80 companies controlling most of the media to 5, they have tons of interests all over the place, and they're all giving money to people in Congress. So it gets back to the same call I've been making from the beginning. It's great that we have some squad members, and we'll have a few more this year for certain because of some of the safe districts like Bowman's, but we need 200 squad members. Because we need 200 people who don't have those ties to the corporate interests in order to pass the laws that we need. But at a certain point, you'll reach a tipping moment, though, and people that are currently there who want to do good but did take that money will start moving away from it and start passing the right kind of laws. but
Yeah,
we have to change the balance, and that requires enough of us in there.
I wholeheartedly agree with you.
It has to be legislative. Just standing out and frankly just bitching about it does no good. And it doesn't matter if it's on the left from like your Jello Biafras or from the right with your fake news, from the Trumpists. I mean, we all agree, okay, yeah, a lot of it is garbage. Some of it is that it's intentionally sensationalized and they're trying to pack that time in. I mean, the major news networks are incredibly repetitive. I don't understand how anybody watches that garbage. And it's so slow. They take any little thing that comes out and they just stretch it out and out and out. You're like, come on, there's a reason I get most of my news from
newspapers. In talking head after talking head to talk about the same subject. And I think that's a great segue to, the fact that the media has such an important control, not just of covering politics, but specific processes within politics. For example, we're in the middle of the Republican convention. We had the Democratic convention last week, both of which were being hosted by the mainstream media networks like CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. And likewise, this was also done for the debates and will be for the upcoming debates as well. I'd love to hear, in your opinion, how you felt both about the convention itself as well as how the media has been handling the conventions. I know we're partially way through the Republican convention, but have you been watching the conventions?
Honestly, in some ways, I'm one of the worst people you could ask that kind of question because I never watch them. I don't find that kind of thing really appealing. But it's more because of the way that I approach news in general. I don't watch the major news networks. I don't watch television for any kind of news. I read 16 newspapers a week.
Okay.
I mean, there is a ton of news out there. And one of the sad things is, one of the nice things about a 24-hour news cycle would have been we should cover a lot more of what happens in the world, and we just don't. Yeah. Oftentimes, European papers, papers out of the Middle East and Asia, often cover American politics and American society better than our major papers and news networks do, from what I can tell from it.
Yeah.
But the conventions, I treat them the same way I tend to treat speeches. I prefer transcripts. I'll often sit through parts of them or like important, clips of something that's important, but I want the transcript because I can read it quickly. I'm on to the next thing rather than sitting through the long conventions. I'm not
charisma try and bias you a little bit. The showmanship can go a long way a lot of the times.
It can, and people are, and I do not fault anybody for appreciating any of that stuff. I do understand the purpose of it. I mean, and again, realistically, I'm a historian of ideas, and I teach a ton of our religious traditions, and ritual and myth are extremely important in human existence, and having these rituals is important in any kind of society. It's in politics, and that kind of pageantry is a kind of civic ritual, and it really does have an important place. The reason I'm a particularly bad person to ask is that I don't really have a lot of patience to sit through hours of it each night. I want okay, give me the highlights and the transcripts of all the speeches. Cool, I'm done. And I'm off to the next thing.
I certainly can understand that because, to be fair, it's not like significantly new things are coming out, or it's like, a lot of the people who end up speaking are not particularly people we care about a lot of the times. But I like to watch it simply because I kind of want to know where the nation's attention is, because you're right. These traditions do end up, cultivating a lot of regular viewers. And I think we had roughly like 1.7 million viewers a night for the Democratic convention. And so I like to just know where they're focused at. And I think one of the interesting themes has been, this kind of dynamic that the Democratic Party has been trying to play of, who do you focus your recruitment efforts on? And right now, it certainly seems like it's a lot of the conservative people from Never Trumpers. And I'd love to hear your perspective as someone who is running in a true swing district. What is your philosophy on that? Should they be focusing on trying to win those potentially swing independents and Republicans, or should they be trying to focus on turning out the base more? What do you think the party should be focusing on?
Well, I mean, first, you made a quick point about sometimes the speakers are not terribly important, or you might not want to hear somebody. Oftentimes, some of those are really important still to pick up on, which is why I am always very careful to go back and look at the transcripts of everything, and then if something really seems important, I'll go back and look at a clip of it, because some really important stuff does come out. I mean, we saw that recently with some of like Don Jr.'s comments in the Republican convention here. I mean, the whole MAGA approach really has completely captured the Republican base, and this is long going to outlast Trump. And it gets back to a point I've made from the beginning. As soon as Trump appeared as a politician, Trump is not the problem. Trump is a symptom of a much deeper problem, and what Trump is doing, because it's appealing, is not going away. After Trump, there will be more people like Trump running on the same basic approach. As far as the Democrats and what we should be appealing to, you mentioned a contrast between chasing conservative votes and chasing the base.
Yeah,
I think they're both mistakes, honestly.
Okay.
It's just it doesn't make sense. What you need is to maintain a bit of openness that allows you to hold on to the base and expand it in a number of ways. One of those expansive ways is to try and bring in those conservative independents or never Trumpers, but another is to energize and excite younger voters who still turn out in around 12%, which is terrible. I mean, if millennials all voted at the same rate as boomers, they would decide every single race.
One of the biggest sea changes we could do.
I think all but like 3 or 4 states would be blue if millennials voted based upon their voting patterns. If they voted in greater than 12% on average. So getting younger voters to turn out, making it easier for working class voters to turn out, because a lot of people still can't get the Tuesday off to do things, or don't have the transport, can't get to a polling stations or whatever. There's still tons of issues that keep poor people from voting. And then there's all the gerrymandering and everything else. But there's tons of like disaffected voters. And certainly a lot of progressive, populist, and leftist Americans are left out. About half the electorate doesn't turn up most of the time. And a lot of them don't turn up because they just don't care. So you're not going to appeal to them. But plenty of others don't turn up because they don't think politics talks to them. They don't trust the politicians. They think we're all full of shit, right? Basically, and that nothing's going to change. And I think that we need to present a compelling vision to them that things can get better. And frankly, the way they chase after Republicans in the convention here and a lot of Biden positions are not a good way to do that. There was a fantastic analysis done of the Clinton strategy and what they were going after in 2016, which actually was the same base. They were looking for never Trumper conservatives. And there are mathematically far fewer of them than there are disaffected leftists.
Yeah.
If you want to win races, you have to talk progressive issues. It's another one of the reasons that we've lost so many state houses in this country. I mean, with the rise of the DLC ideas in the 1970s, and then with their full takeover of the Democratic Party in the 1990s, we have steadily alienated a greater and greater share of the working class. And I think that is the natural coalition for a party that says it's the party of the people.
I do agree with you there, because, you know, when you look at the numbers of those that are not turning out right now demographically, they are classic people who are in that progressive populist mold. You have a very multiracial base, particularly people of color, end up not being able to vote. Often it's not just because they don't want to vote. Sometimes it is voter suppression as well. It tends to be younger people.
We have an unexpected guest. Sorry.
That's the last part I got to ask you about. We got to get to know.
They don't really control when you don't really control when they feel like showing up or
no. They're the ones that rule us. But you know, last thing I was saying before I talk about that cat, who is a lovely cat, is that, you know, they tend to be young. They tend to be people who are poorer because they can't get the time off to go vote as easily. There's a lot of factors that play into it. They tend to be less religious. That does tend to drift a little bit more left. So it's just like, I think you're absolutely right that if you want to win, you can either aim at this 8% of Republicans who might be never Trumpers, or you can aim at the 40% of the country that doesn't vote. And I would like to go with the 40% personally.
I would too. And if winning elections was the point, that would be a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And honestly, especially for that DLC crowd, it honestly isn't. When they decided to embrace professionals, and a lot of this you can trace back really to the early 1970s. When they decided to embrace the college-educated professional class and start going after Wall Street and technocrats and all that, they consciously chose to leave behind the working class. And that is what opened the door to the Reagan Democrats phenomenon and has allowed conservatives to seize so much of the working class. And those in the working class who can't buy into the right's arguments simply tune out. So some of them we lost, and they're voters that can be swayed by populist rhetoric. That's how, again, Obama won in 2008.
Yeah.
He pulled a bunch of people, and they ended up going to Trump afterwards. There are swing voters there, and there's also a huge chunk of the electorate that simply stopped caring when we stopped caring about their issues. If winning is the objective, we know mathematically how to do it, and scholars have been screaming this for decades. But it's honestly about chasing after that money.
Yeah.
So we have two right-wing parties because of money, which is, again, why we need 200 squad members so we can change the damn laws and get the bribery out of Congress.
Yeah, it's a tall task. I think overcoming it, like we both can understand, the money does have power. Like 91% of elections are won by the person with more money, oftentimes. And so it's going to be an uphill battle, but you're right. It's super important that we do that. So the last question,
yeah.
So the last question I have for you before I go to a couple of audience questions, I got to address the cat. So cats versus dogs. I have to focus on this. Is this the first pet you've had? Have you had pets in the past?
Oh gosh, I've had critters my entire life. My grandfather had a huge yard and always had tons of animals, so I grew up with tons of animals around. I've always had them. In fact, I'm the third generation caretaker for my grandfather's surviving tortoises. So I have two Mojave Desert tortoises. They're both in their 80s. They're both amazing creatures still. That I can sit there and they'll crawl up in my lap and eat on my hands. But yeah, I've always had cats, dogs, all kinds of reptiles, fish. We had birds, all kinds of things. I currently have 3 cats, a dog, a fish aquarium, and 2 tortoises.
So I have to ask, like, how do you balance that? Like, it's like managing a zoo, getting on the campaign trail, teaching. Like, how do you try and balance that? Do you have any favorites of the pets too?
Honestly, the animals do help to add a bit of balance to life. They help to keep you centered a bit. Honestly, they give me someone to chat with. They give me something to distract me a little bit here and there. But yeah, I mean, I have 80-hour weeks because I teach and I'm in politics and doing all kinds of stuff here. But I still have my family to care for, and they bring so much love into life, and it just unconditionally. I've never understood. Well, I mean, I can understand it sort of academically, but no, I can't relate to people who say that cats aren't affectionate, cats aren't loyal. Only dogs are. I'm like, dogs are loyal and affectionate, but so are cats. If you show the cat respect and if you treat the cat like a cat, they will love you. I come home and 3 cats staple themselves to me, follow me around the house. I sit down, there's always a cat. I mean, I can call them. I can just, I can literally call them from across the room and they will come over and hop in.
It's so true. Like, cats are they are a little bit variable, but oftentimes I think you're absolutely right. You get what you give a lot of the times. And if you're treating them with respect, oftentimes they're going to show you that love, especially if you get them younger. That bond is especially strong. And I think you're absolutely right how important it is to have unconditional love, especially when you're a politician. you got to have a couple people who's like, yeah, you're in my corner. I know that. I'm good here. But
there's a fun point I can make here. Someone had asked me a question related to the animals a couple months ago. How did it go? It was something like what lessons would you take from your animals that have affected your approach to politics? I was like, well, that's a fascinating question. And immediately an answer occurred to me, which I thought was fun. And it's that they're all different. They have different needs. They have different psychologies. Dogs are not like cats. They really just aren't. One of the reasons a lot of people have a hard time relating to cats is that they'll treat a cat like a dog. You just walk right in, you pet the cat. If I walk into someone's house and they have a cat, I will never walk close to the cat. I won't even look at the cat. I will sit down and wait for the cat to show an interest. And if the cat looks at me, I'll still look away, but I'll put my hand down, out, and they'll get curious and they'll come over and they'll sniff. And as soon as they do, you have made a friend. If you approach the cats in a way that makes sense to cats, you'll make a lifetime friendship there. Same thing with dogs. Dogs, every single dog breed has a specific thing that they're bred for, over 10,000 years of being around us. So you have to recognize what that dog's need is and then fulfill it somehow. Golden retrievers, I had a golden retriever before this one, they have to retrieve. My current dog is more of a hunting dog. So if she gets her time to patrol the yard and look for squirrels and rabbits and whatnot there, she's super happy. But when you don't give them what they need, that's when they act out. And that's when you have problems. It's never the dog, it's how we're treating them. Obviously tortoises are different. Everything's different. Yeah. So it's more of like, if you can recognize what groups of people need and speak to them respectfully in their own language, you can actually get somewhere. If you just insist that everyone thinks like you're talking to yourself.
I think that's a great lesson. And I wish I had heard that many years ago, because my first interaction with a cat was with my friend's house. And I did do it exactly as he said. And I treated it like a dog. I stared at it immediately as I came in. I tried to pet it. And my first experience was a cat leaping up on me and biting me right on the nose. So you're absolutely right. You have to treat them how they need to be treated. I think that's a very valuable lesson for animals as well as life in general. So Liam, thank you so much for answering my questions today. I'd love to ask a couple from the audience while we have some time. Sure. The first one comes from the Falcone General. He asks you, how do you think the governor should be trying to address the California wildfires?
I mean, it really depends on what you mean. Because there's honestly not a huge amount that we can do. The West is drying out, and it's going to keep drying out over the course of the century. We've been in sustained droughts for about 10 years now, and that's not going to change anytime soon, which means that these are all powder kegs ready to go up. And whether it's because of faulty utility grids, transformers and whatnot, like we had last year with all the PG&E spark fires here, or lightning strikes like we're having right now, or arson, it's always going to happen. So we do need to improve our actual resources and ability to fight that. But the state budgets are going to be a bit constrained there. And that gets back to where we need to absolutely fix the federal budget. California taxes have gone up steadily for a long time because the federal budgets and federal taxation is all wrong. And we don't have the same ability to, California is not a currency producer. We can't, we can't just print money or whatever. If we have a problem, we just go farther into debt. So the federal government really needs to step up there. So honestly, what I would want to see is the governor finding some way to get the federal government to step the hell up and put money in California. And unfortunately, with the thin-skinned tyrant that we have, who's decided to punish all of California because the governor isn't kissing his ass.
Nah, it's because you're just
the solution is not to kiss his ass. That doesn't help either. But so if the question specifically is about what the governor can do there, we just need to improve the amount of resources that we have there. And that honestly means directing real cash to it. A lot of our firefighters for quite some time have frankly been prison labor and exploited, underpaid prison labor fighting wildfires. That personally offends me. I like that people are going to get some kind of job skills while they're in prison. That's fine. Pay them a living wage and then hire them as firefighters afterwards, and then keep them on the payroll fighting fires as professionals. That's one good thing California could do on its own.
Yeah, and to that final point you had made, I hear this point from the right very often when it comes to illegal immigration and how it undercuts wages. Where is the offense to, prison labor undercutting labor? I don't get it. Why do they not keep that consistent standard? Because you're right. They should be paid a living wage. Just because they're incarcerated doesn't mean they should be not subjected to our existing minimum wage law.
Right. And it's not the prisoner's fault any more than it's the immigrant's fault. It's the companies and the systems that want that cheap labor, including, we might point out, the Trump organization, which has employed undocumented workers. But it's the companies that want that cheap labor that they can exploit, that they can pay far too little for. that is lowering wages for Americans, not the immigrants. If
And I bet if
they
you
had
had to pay
the
them
same rights
fairly.
as everyone else and got the same wages, it would not affect us at all. And
Yeah.
the 13th Amendment is a serious problem. We never actually abolished slavery in this country.
Yeah, I do agree in that sense, but like also I fundamentally think we'll have less incentive to keep people in prison if we are no longer getting that cheap labor. Like I just think
Good.
it fundamentally like, that's a great thing.
Yeah.
So I wholeheartedly agree. We should be paying them a reasonable minimum wage. Like one of the things that's a problem is, recidivism is a big problem why we have a large prison population, and it's because what economic means do they have when they get out? It's already hard enough to get a job when a lot of employers require you to acknowledge you were a prisoner. Maybe you should be able to at least earn some money while you're in prison. Like you're still doing a job, you're still being detained. You don't get to like go back after work to a home and have freedom. No, you're still imprisoned, but like work like everyone else if you so desire.
Right.
Like obviously you're not forced into it, but like if you want to make a living wage while you're in prison and save up so you don't have to come back to prison once you're released, I think that's a great thing.
Yeah. There's one of the things about, I don't know, getting a nerd like me to run is that I'm walking in with a stack of outlines for legislation, both the things that I can reach out to people that I know already can be interested in things to work together, or things that I will just straight up champion myself. One of them is actually to propose that prisoners be paid the same prevailing wages as everyone else in the state that they're in, and if you can tie that to like living wage pushes elsewhere. So hopefully we get to a federal living wage, but still that they get paid the prevailing wage in their state, right? And that they be helped to get a job in the skills that they've learned in prison afterwards. So they're not stuck with the whole like prison record that keeps them out there, because that contributes to that high recidivism rate that we have there. And I would like to guarantee their actual civil rights while they're in there. Felons should have the vote. Their punishment is being imprisoned, right? Which is punishment enough in most of the world. I mean, you've got tons of prisons in the world where they don't even have walls or guns in there. I mean, your punishment is being held away from your family and forced to live somewhere else. That sucks already. The prison part, being in a damn cell, is enough. Taking away someone's constitutional rights both in prison and afterwards ought to be illegal.
And I think that should be pretty obvious with the ongoing protests. When you've had, I think, several governors say that to be able to try and quell these protesters, they're going to threaten to remove their civil rights of being able to vote in the fall from that protesting action. And it makes sense. Like, if you have a true authoritarian fascist who wants to try and make sure that they win, they're going to just start arresting people in blue areas. If it's a Republican, or if it's a Democrat who wants to do that, they're going to do it to Republicans. So stop taking away their right to vote and enabling that to even be a possibility.
Exactly. Where we are now, with a serious push from establishment politicians toward neo-fascism, has been a long time coming. This has been a multi-decade stretch, and a ton of laws have laid the groundwork for the kind of power grabs that we can see now. We need to start eroding the power of the state to do things like this. And one really good way is to guarantee the civil rights of prisoners. And if you guarantee them a living wage, you're right, it takes away some of the corrupt incentives. The judges have been caught taking bribes to lock more people up. You think there's money being made off of people being incarcerated? That's not helping us. I mean, with all the people we lock up, and the U.S. locks up more people, we have 1/4 of the population of China. We lock up more people than China does. And they're a literally totalitarian state.
That's further than that. China, India, and Indonesia combined, we have more prisoners than.
Yes, and we're supposedly the land of the free? No, I mean, if you're not locking up that many people, you're talking about a literal police state. And the reason we have it is we have made it profitable to do. If we take away the profit motive, if we ban the private prisons, if we give the prison labor actually a living wage, we reduce the incentives to lock up so many of our people.
It's so true. And, to wrap up on that subject, I think it's just It's baffling on an economic sense too. Like, I think a lot of Republicans can speak economics. This is something you told me the first time we had an interview together. You try to speak their language, and economics ends up doing it. A person in prison is not going to be able to contribute to the economy as much, and we are spending $30,000 a year to just imprison them.
And to
That's
ruin
my economic case.
Yeah, you're cutting into their productivity for the rest of their working life.
And you're impacting their family too. It's not just for the economy. Like, think about the single mothers out there. You know, yes, some it's the father left, some it's the father died. A lot of them are simply the father is in jail, and that household is now going to be destabilized. And you're not just impacting this generation's economic productivity. A single mother's household is going to be less productive for the child in their development phases. So it's going to have long-lasting ramifications on our economy by maintaining this police state.
That reinforces generational poverty. And that's the key issue. For some parts of the Republican base, that's kind of the point, because they're making a particular type of moral argument and they're fine with it. It's one of those, like, if you're poor, there's something wrong with you kind of ideals. You're not going to make any headway with that kind of crowd. But there is a significant part of the Republicans' coalition, particularly conservative independents, but also some moderate Republicans, who really do care about the basic economics of it and what makes sense for the society as a whole. They do still, I mean, one of the core conservative values is conscientiousness. And you don't see it among a lot of like the reactionary neo-fascist types, but a lot of the genuine conservatives still really care about the broader social impact. And you can make a good argument that you're harming society with mass incarceration. It's certainly not lowering crime rates. We have the highest crime rates in a developed world. So this mass incarceration has done nothing to fix the problem.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you. Well, Liam, thank you so much for taking the time today to be able to answer my question and my favorite question from our audience today. How can the people be able to support you today if they liked hearing what you had to say on today's current events, the general prison situation, and so many other topics we got to talk about a lot today?
Absolutely. I mean, the single best thing that anybody really can do, and this is true for anybody across the country, is to donate to the campaigns. And I know that sounds hard, but please understand that even if you don't have much to give, every little bit does add up when you're trying to run clean money candidates. People-powered candidates need the support of people, and it's the only way we beat the candidates that have all that corrupt corporate cash. My opponent takes 98% of his funds from corporations. Right? So we need to compete by attracting funds from people who really want progressive champions in Congress. If you want to see me on the floor of the House advancing a people's agenda, then bit.ly/Liam Donate is the quick Act Blue link, but liamomera.org has a donate link at the top. There's also, if you want to join our text banks and phone banks, we phone bank several days a week. We text bank several days a week. You can sign up on the website to join there.
Okay, well, I wholeheartedly agree with you. It is true. It's a sad reality. Until we get the money out of politics, we're going to have to keep funding it to overcome it. Right. So, yes, we have your website scrolling across the bottom of the page, liamomera.org. I hope everyone will take that opportunity to do so. Liam, as always, it's been a pleasure getting to talk with you, as well as, get to meet your cat today. That was a pleasure. This is the first time I got to meet it. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, maybe another one will walk by next time.
Yeah, next time we talk, I want to see this tortoise. Like, that is my goal. Like, that was cool to hear you got that.
Yeah, I could send you some pictures or something if you want to see them. Yeah, I can meet with them. But yeah.
Okay. Well, Liam, I hope you have a great rest of your evening. Thank you so much for taking the time with us today.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Okay, everyone. So that was Liam O'Mara. As always, it's always a pleasure when we get to see him on the program. And we want to thank him so much for taking the opportunity to talk to us on multiple times. And we're wishing him the best of luck in defeating Ken Calvert this fall. It's important that we take this opportunity, not just to, get another progressive victory, but we're flipping a red state blue. We're showing that these swing district areas can be won with progressives. So I think there's an extra value in investing in this race. With that being said, let's wrap up with some programming updates of what we have upcoming this week. Tomorrow, we'll be talking with Kara Eastman, another congressional candidate. She comes from Nebraska's 2nd District. And then on Friday, we'll be talking to a spokesperson for the Movement for a People's Party. So we are really looking forward to that. The convention is coming up on Sunday. We really like to hear from these third parties because you know what? there are a lot of problems with the Democratic Party. There are some great Democrats in there, like Liam, that we're trying to hopefully win. And we have to make sure that we have all these different paths available for us to try and create the progress that we need. With that being said, I hope you guys will share this video, making sure that Liam gets more visibility for his campaign and helping spread the channel. I hope you will like today's video if you did enjoy it. And finally, I hope you'll subscribe so that you'll always be notified when we have an upcoming video. As well, I hope you guys are staying safe out there because, as we talked about today, there's a lot of tumultuous situations around the country right now. So we hope you're staying safe. We love you guys for tuning in and helping support the movement to empower people. And as always, we hope you guys are staying rosy out there.